everyone. My name is Shamyle Ghazali, and I'm standing here in front of you today to talk about the magical foodstuff that is tofu, and how you can embrace the mindset of tofu, like I did, and get on the path to programming excellence, especially when it comes to your first development job. Before I get started, just a little bit about myself. I'm a junior software consultant at Tandem, which is a software consulting company here in Chicago, focusing on solving technical problems for clients ranging from the pharmaceutical industry to the public sector and beyond. I started at Tandem as an apprentice at the end of 2016. And before that, I actually had a background in chemical engineering from Northwestern, super relevant to programming, of course. And I spent a few years in the pharmaceutical industry. And after that, I decided to switch to software development. I took a few online courses in front-end development online at Ghazali, and then I got my apprenticeship. And a lesser-known fact about me is I am a successor to Jean-Luc Picard, captain of the USS Enterprise, because outside of programming, Star Trek is my life. So you might be wondering where I'm going with this. Tofu, programming, development. I mean, if you think about it, tofu on its own, in its raw form, is probably one of the most boring foods out there. It's pretty bland, and honestly, it doesn't really have a flavor of its own. And yet, it's so highly nutritious, and it's used in virtually every cuisine out there these days. So what is it that makes tofu so special, and yet so bland? And in my personal opinion, I believe it's the extreme versatility of tofu that fascinates me. You know, you could take tofu and throw it into your favorite curry, stir fry, taco, and it has this uncanny ability to absorb the flavor of every other ingredient. And I think that in itself is such an important life lesson that we can use not just in our programming careers, but in our personal lives as well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I became tofu when I started my first job. It was my interview at Tandem, actually. I went in, obviously, with butterflies in my stomach, super intimidated. And at Tandem, the interview process is you basically have a pairing session with a developer who has more experience than you. And I walked in, and the first thing I realized is I have to operate on a MacBook. And prior to that, I had never touched a MacBook in my life. I was on a Windows machine throughout. So that in itself was like, okay, I have to deal with this. And the second problem is, I had never written a line of Ruby code. I'd looked at some syntax probably before that. I was, like I said, at Udacity, I just did some JavaScript, and that was it. And so that was really intimidating, having to write a method that I think it calculated a certain value. But I realized I wanted this job so badly that I basically put my fears aside and I said, okay, I'm going to behave like Spock. I'm going to be logical. I'm going to ask the right questions and just use logic. And I got through, and that's why I'm standing here. So my main point with bringing up this interview is the idea of being open-minded. I think that's something that's essential for an entry-level developer. And knowing this applies to any type of development job. So if you're applying to a company that's a product company, you're probably going to be working on an existing code base. And I know as entry-level developers, we want to prove ourselves. But I think the best thing you can do is first let it all sink in, seep in the code base. When you look at this giant application with thousands of files, try to see if there's any pattern in there. Look at how your coworkers who have more experience are writing their code. Tomorrow if you're asked to write a feature, a front-end feature, you write a JavaScript file, and you say, you know what, I'm going to use jQuery here. And nowhere else in the application is jQuery being used. So before you start writing your own patterns, try and see and learn from the patterns that your coworkers, future coworkers are going to be using. And as far as consulting goes, it's interesting because in consulting you have all these different clients, and each client speaks a certain language. That's how I like to think of it, at least. They have their own jargon, their own acronyms, their own documentation, and I personally have found that if I don't get the context, if I don't absorb this documentation and their business rules and regulations, even if it's like mundane, I actually I'm more satisfied when I'm writing code because I know it's towards an end, it means something. So it's very important to get that language. I'd also say, it's easy when you're going, like I went into Tandem and I was like, oh, I really know a little bit of JavaScript, and I might never have to write any code in Ruby, and I was wrong. And about 2 years later now, I love working full stack. I never thought I'd be looking into databases or writing Rails applications, but there you go. And I think the third point is very interesting because I've noticed that about myself and also other developers who came to Tandem after me, is being able to get feedback can sometimes be really hard. And part of it is, your coworkers are busy, they might have other things they need to do, like work. And so you might not always get the feedback you want. And I think it's extremely important in your initial few weeks to just demand it, ask for it, because it also helps them realize how they can give you feedback, because they might be afraid of how you would react to it. I remember my second week at Tandem, I had to rename a method in a Ruby file. I did that, and then I went to a few of the files where I thought the method was being called, and then I pushed the changes, and lo and behold, the build failed. And I still remember my peer's comments to me after that. He told me my process was sloppy. And that stung me a little at the time, but it's probably the most helpful piece of feedback I have ever received in those first few months. Obviously, I had to do a global find and replace, look for the method, whatever it's called, change it, run the tests, and then push it up. I didn't do that. And to this day, after 2 years, whenever I'm trying to push something or making a change that affects the whole application, I remember the word sloppy. So at that initial period, accept the feedback you get. If it's critical, it's probably in your best interest. Another thing I'd like to point out is, when you start working as an entry-level developer, you have this fear of having to keep up with the competition. Those rock stars out there, writing their code, pushing, running tests, everything looks great being them. But you have to realize you could have 10 years of experience, but you're always going to have to learn, and you're going to have to keep up with the times. So you're all in the same walk of stir-fry, really. And I think the best thing you can do initially is absorb as much as you can from your coworkers. At Tandem, we have a lot of one-on-ones with mentors and team leads, managers, and sometimes you go into those meetings and they ask you, how's everything going? And it gets a little awkward at times when you don't have much to say. And I actually took advantage of that and realized I could use this as a learning experience. So I remember a couple of months ago, I was really interested in learning more about software design patterns. So I had a one-on-one with my team lead, and it was about 30 minutes, and I came out understanding the strategy pattern, the command pattern, the factory pattern, and I started using those, and I realized, this is the best use of my time, is getting the advantage of absorbing the information from my coworkers. I'd also like to point out on the flip side, if you are hiring or you're looking for developers, junior developers like myself, Tofu developers are probably your best bet, because we are people who will, since we have absorbed so much, we have so much to give. It's similar to how you would put tofu on a taco, right? It tastes amazing. You need to put Tofu developers in your company. At the end, all I want to say is, you're going to make mistakes when you start off, and if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not working hard enough. So the important thing to remember is whether you're applying for a new job, you've just started your first development job, or you've been 10 years into it, always be bold, be you, and be Tofu. Thank you.